because homeowners set their sum insured and don't revisit it each year at the time of renewal. BF&M want to ensure you're informed and have the coverage you need when you need it. Learn more about the risks of underinsurance at bfm.bm/underinsurance.
And a pleasant Easter weekend ahead. High pressure continues to build in for the long Easter weekend with predominantly dry and sunny weather. Humidity levels will be a lot more comfortable. Tonight, mostly clear to partly cloudy. Winds northerly light to moderate with a low of 61. Tomorrow, generally sunny. Winds northeasterly moderate, veering northeasterly moderate overnight with a high of 69 and a low of 62. And a very special thank you to our meteorologist, James Dudson, and our observer, Krista Russell. And, of course, the great folks over at BF&M and Bermuda Weather Service. Got motion to adjourn coming up right after this.
This weather update was provided by the Bermuda Weather Service, sponsored by BF&M.
And, again, motion to adjourn is pleasantly in the studio. Good afternoon, fellas. Hello. How's everybody?
I'm good. Good afternoon. And I'm sure that the listening audience is realizing that you are not Don Bassett.
Yeah, I think so. At least I hope so.
Yeah,
At least I hope so.
Before we kick in, we have two very special guests with us. Dr. Douglas Decouto of Shadow Finance for the Bermuda Alliance, and Michael Fahy, Shadow of Home Affairs. And before we kick in with the guests, I just wanted to give a brief thank you and send off to Brother Don Bassett for all of his time that he's spent with Motion to Adjourn. 5 years since we started the show, and it has been a journey. It was through COVID. Sometimes we had to be in here with screens up and in separate rooms, and some will call in, and we went through all of that, trying to keep Bermuda informed and up to date on everything that was happening, and also what was coming out of both parties at the time. So with that done, I would like to welcome the new DJ and the button pusher and Mike Swinger, DJ LA, who will be now joining us for this show. So thank you so much for filling in, and look forward to getting another 5 years.
Let's get it.
There, keep us.
I'm pretty sure we will.
Excellent. Thank you so much. So, just kicking into the topic today, the reason why I have these two gentlemen is because we are, as an island right now, kind of staring down a bit of global, I don't want to say unrest, but global developments that are coming along with tariffs and cost of living impacts, and also a potential docking fee for Chinese-made vessels. So I really just want to hand over the mic to either one who wants to go first to explain not just the tariff situation and how it's evolving, but also, you know, how that potential docking fee may impact Bermuda.
Okay. Good evening. It's Michael Fahy. Thanks for having us on, and Dr. Decouto for the show tonight. It is a very important topic, and the reason that we're on here today is because it all relates to the cost of living, which obviously is a major issue in Bermuda. My particular role, the opposition leader asked if I would take on the Shadow Ministry of Home Affairs, which is a lot of the regulatory arms that we'll be dealing with, items that relate to cost of living, and also I deal with housing and municipalities, and Shadow the Deputy Premier. But what's the main reason we're here? And that's to talk about, as I said, the cost of living and these tariffs. So, as we know, the President of the United States has been having a lot of fun, I think, in terms of introducing tariffs globally on any number of different items and any number of different countries, all really, I think, to come up with different trade deals, right? But how does that affect Bermuda in terms of tariffs, number one, and another point is Chinese-made vessels and entering U.S. ports. So one of the things that the President and his team has said is that there's a potential that tariffs would be levied on vessels that had been built in China and would be subject to a fee every time they enter a U.S. port. And the first time they came out, they said every time would be about $1.5 million. Now, why is that an issue for us? Well, the biggest ship that imports food to Bermuda is the Oleander, which is a Chinese-built vessel. So the potential is that that could, if these tariffs go in that direction, obviously increase costs majorly. Now, what does that mean? If, and again, these are all big ifs, because as we know, these things change daily, okay, in terms of what you hear on the news, what we hear from our sources that are meeting with the president's team in the United States, and what we also hear from government sources. At the moment, we think that maybe it won't be $1.5 million every time that the ship comes into U.S. port. It may be related strictly to tonnage. And what does that mean? That means smaller ships might have a smaller tariff. Larger ships would have a larger tariff. Also, we've also heard that it may not, in fact, even be that. It may be only on Chinese vessels that are importing goods into the United States. And of course, the Oleander doesn't really bring stuff to the U.S. It brings stuff out of the U.S., okay? Mostly U.S. goods, etc., that arrive on our shelves for food and things like that. But again, all up in the air, so all we can do is speculate, and that's what the teams that are in the private sector are working on. They can only speculate what this could mean. So they're working very diligently with U.S. government officials to see if they can make sure that Bermuda and other Caribbean islands, in fact, when they're working in this, are not affected by these tariffs. What does all of this mean? In fact, if in fact it's $1.5 million every time the ship enters a U.S. port, it would potentially add to every single container about $10,000 to every single container of cost. That would have a massive knock-on and detrimental effect to every good that is brought in by ship into Bermuda. Because the shipper, what do they have to do? They have to take those costs and spread them out across every container that they bring in. So that's why, when you hear these things, that means massive costs for every consumer. That could mean a loaf of bread, which is already expensive, at $8 a loaf, or thereabouts, right, when you go into the grocery store.
Yep.
Think about what that could mean. That could mean a loaf of bread. And I haven't worked out the numbers, but I can tell you it's going to be a heck of a lot more expensive than $8 a loaf of bread.
Ain't going to be cheaper.
Right? Toilet paper, everything that you consume that is brought in from overseas will rise in cost. So it's very important that work is done to try and limit the damage. So that's the kind of the brief background to that.
Thank you so much. And just something that was mentioned in the joint statement that you both released was a contingency fund. And I'm looking at the Shadow of Finance and thinking, maybe I should ask you to break down the contingency fund and that idea for the listening audience.
Sure, Dwayne. Thank you. So contingency, right? What does that mean? Well, it means something might happen. You don't quite know what it is yet, but let's put something aside in case it does come up, right? So you guys probably know this one. A failure to plan is a plan to fail. I mean, we don't know really exactly what's going to happen, and Mike there outlined a couple things. But we're pretty sure something's going to happen. We're pretty sure things aren't going to get cheaper. We're pretty sure changes are going to have to be made. Now, what do we know? What's the number one thing facing people today on this island? Cost of living. In fact, I was looking in the news today, this headline, eggs are so expensive, people are buying potatoes for Easter. So I don't know if we're there yet, but that tells you what people are thinking. So Michael talked about, okay, the private companies are looking at a lot of options, like they might just have to pay these fees, which we don't know what they're going to be yet, and that money, that cost would go straight out of the pockets of the consumers because, they're going to have to raise the prices. They got to run the ship and pay the bill when it gets there and run it back. There's something else going on. There's tariffs. Not only is it the port fee, but the United States has put out all these tariffs on its other trading countries. So if things coming into the United States are going to be more expensive in the United States, where's all our stuff come from? In the United States. So that's going to cost more money. Whatever the solutions will be, whatever the private shipping companies are going to do, whatever the importers are going to do, it's not going to happen next weekend. It's probably not even going to happen next month. So the purpose is the government could set aside a pot of money in this contingency funds. I think we call it supply chain contingency fund. Yeah. So if these port fees come into play, say, I'm going to make the numbers up. So just work with me here. But let's just say it's going to be an extra $500,000 per trip of the oleander, because let's say they've reduced it from $1.5 million. That money's got to come from somewhere. So the government could say, you know what? We'll subsidize that $300,000. So you're going to have to somehow, shipping company, you're going to have to eat a little bit of it. Your customers are going to have to eat a little bit, and the people of Bermuda are going to have to eat a little bit. But you won't have to eat the whole amount. Thereby, we will ease that burden, that cost increase on all the goods. And we will pay for this by setting aside this contingency fund. And we could work out the exact size by thinking how long would we want to do this for, how much percentage we want to subsidize and things like that. And at least people could breathe a little easier knowing that the government would take action to cover this case, so that if it does happen, they're ready to go with a solution. Do you see what I mean?
Absolutely. And do you believe that that should be done in this budget cycle coming up?
Absolutely. Right away.
Yeah. So Dwayne, one of the points that we've learned is the government has been meeting with retailers, has been meeting with wholesalers, the shippers, to find out what is being done and to make suggestions about what can be done. Now, those people that I've spoken with that have been at those meetings have made it pretty clear that the government has essentially said to them, we don't expect that any costs would be passed on to the consumer, which would then mean that if you're a shipper, that the shipper would be expected to eat the whole lot. That is not economically viable for the main shipping lines. They have publicly available accounts. They're prepared to talk about those accounts with the government. It's just simply not viable. And why do I make this point? You will recall after Doug and I put out a statement that made mention of this contingency fund that, by the way, would be, we think, possibly funded by the corporate income tax, which Doug can get into some more, is essentially the PLP, not the government, but the PLP put a statement out that said, here goes the OBA again, just looking after big business. And I read that statement and I thought, it's just the typical nonsense to try and make something up that just is not true. The point is this: do we want the shipping companies and those bringing in the freight to pass on all of the costs to you and I and everybody else in Bermuda? The answer to that has to be no. If it becomes not economically viable for the shippers, and wholesalers and people to bring these and eat the costs, what's the knock-on effect? They close. They say, we cannot run a company at a deficit. Companies are not like governments that can just run up debts and deficits and run continuously into debt and to deficit. It doesn't work. Their shareholders expect more than that. That's how companies work. These companies are not the government. We have to remember that. The government is not the one bringing in these goods. These are private companies. So how do we protect the consumer? Everybody in Bermuda. It's not about protecting big business. It's about protecting our food supply and our chain of supply. And that's what I really, really want people to remember that, because this may not be the only solution, but we think it is a very good solution, and we think that it can work. So again, rather than just simply poo-pooing the idea and saying, oh, look at them, they're after, trying to support their friends in big business. And for the record, I don't know all of these people in these companies. I mean, the whole thing is ridiculous. And then what makes it even more ridiculous is the PLP releases a statement like that, and then 2 days later, the Premier's sitting in a room with all of these entities that he's basically saying that we're trying to protect. The whole thing is just the hypocrisy and everything else I find staggering. We need to find solutions, not poo-poo ideas that can work. And I think that's where Doug and I and the OBA generally, as you know, Dwayne, all of us are looking for solutions for Bermuda. We invite the government to take these ideas. That's what we're here to do. We're here to oppose when opposition is appropriate, but we're also here to supply ideas. So, yeah, thank you.
Thank you for that, and I just want to let the listening audience know that we will be doing attempting to do a 3-part series on this particular topic with the OBA, the PLP, and an independent or a person who is in the industry to shed light on this particular thing from all angles, because I think we're all in it together. But just also bringing up something that you mentioned, Michael, about protecting the consumer. How, and either of you can answer, how do you feel that this tariff situation, these potential dock fees, are going to coincide with government's plans for price control? Because as you know, the OBA, we did not support that measure when it was rolled out in the Thurin speech. But how do you think that is going to correlate when you see prices going through the roof and government is going to essentially try to dictate in a certain sense certain prices?
Price control never works. It didn't work in Cuba. It didn't work in Venezuela. It didn't work in Russia. You got black markets. You got shortages of goods. If a business can't make money selling a thing, it'll just stop selling it. So now there's somewhere between price controls or like a regulated industry like Belco, totally free-for-all private enterprise, and let's take the shipping thing, right, where we have a few critical shipping links. We have a very specific crisis in front of us. Mm-hmm. It's not a general, let's just subsidize shipping costs. We have a very specific, acute crisis in front of us today. I think that's important. And we need to maintain these shipping links, and we don't want these key supply links to go out of business. So it's not about propping them up. It's not about subsidizing them. Mm. It's about make sure the hit to the person buying their food in the grocery store is not as big as it would otherwise be for some period of time. The other thing about price controls is, and I'm sure Michael will have a lot to say about this, if you're an entrepreneur, you got a business, and maybe the government was to say, oh, well, this is a critical good, I can't forget the exact terminology, a critical good that you're selling. The government wants to come in and look in your books. Now, I know Bermudians, they value their privacy, they value their independence, and I don't think that idea is going to go down very well with any businesses, big or small.
You know, on that point, it is almost laughable to think that the government would have the idea to go into private enterprise when we don't even have audited accounts and any number of different quangos and the like, and the Shadow Minister of Finance can comment more on that. I want to just kind of go back a little bit in terms of some of the supply chain, because when you're talking to a lot of people about it, and obviously I've been speaking to many people, and of course some people say, well, why can't the shipping lines just move to Halifax? Why can't we just import things from Canada or some other jurisdiction? It's never as simple as that. What we have to remember is that the shipping companies that we have had relationships with their suppliers for decades and decades and decades. Their supply chains are set up. It's out of Florida. It's out of New Jersey. They have warehouses. They have companies that they buy from. It's not as simple as just saying, oh, well, I'm going to send a ship to Halifax and I'm going to make purchases. The thing is this. We buy, or entities in Bermuda, they buy from major companies in the U.S. Importers, yeah, thank you. Importers, whether that's a grocery chain or whether that's one of the wholesalers. They bring these goods in from the U.S. through relationships that they have to try and get better deals. So they say, I can only buy X. The problem that a lot of these importers are now facing in any event is we're small fry. Okay, this is what I'm being told from those that I speak to in the industry. We are small fry. So it is actually very difficult to form new relationships with people and expect to get heavily discounted goods. You're dealing with entities in the United States that are worth billions. We're a few $1 million for these guys. It's actually chump change for these big companies in the U.S. to be dealing with Bermuda. So for a shipping line to say, I'm just going to go to Halifax, They have to set up their supply chains. They have to have agreements and contracts set up. They have to get the port set up. They have to have the people trained. They have to understand how the ship gets in there. They have to do all of these things. So it's not just we can change overnight. Now, even if they did say that's what we're going to do because these tariffs do come in, that's when what Doug is saying is at least there is a contingency plan that the government can do. Because a lot of this, the government can actually do very little. They can't just go in and take over a shipping line, for example, and say, well, we're going to do it better. Government never does anything better. That's just a fact. We never do it. Government doesn't do things better than private entities in most circumstances. What they can do is they can help regulate, they can help change. Now, on this, and I'll hand over to Doug. What I'm hearing, okay, is that what government can do is do something different with the Department of Environment and Natural Resources. That is the department that actually governs food importation in certain circumstances. So let's take a prime little example. This evening, at 3 o'clock this afternoon, the government sent out to wholesalers, grocery stores, an email from their agricultural officer to say, local farmers have had an issue with their lettuce crop because of inclement weather. Therefore, the government has decided to remove the embargo on imported lettuce. And the lettuce can come in on the next ship. It will be more formalized on Monday. So it's a good long weekend. So at 3 o'clock on a Thursday, importers, stores get this notice to say, oh, you can go source lettuce.
Can't they get that on Amazon and just zip exit
Exactly. How does that actually work in practice? So here's then what happens. They go off and they go, the stores and the wholesalers go, okay, we can now go get lettuce. Okay, number one, from where? So they have to source it. Then they have to bring it in. Then they have to get it on a ship. That's going to take a couple weeks. And what's it going to cost if you want it sooner? You freight it in by air. That puts the price up. Who takes the blame? Of course, the wholesaler. They get it in. They put their markup on. Then the retailer puts their markup on. So your head lettuce is obviously all of a sudden much more expensive than you used to. Why? Because all of a sudden we're allowed to bring it in. So who's to blame for that? All I'm saying on that point is that there are things that government can do, the Department of Environment and Natural Resources, to look again at legislation that, by the way, is from like the 1930s, and say, do we need to have as many embargoes as we have at the moment on certain types of fruit, vegetables, and food? And I'll let Doug talk, but I'll go into a bit how some of the duty works as well.
Just really quickly, we'll take our first break, and then we'll come back and have the Shadow of Finance's thoughts. Thank you.
Winston, you're drunk. Yes, madam, and you are ugly. And tomorrow, I shall be sober.
When you're right, you're right. Churchill's, cigars, fine wines, spirits, 27 York Street, St. George's, 297-1650.
Can you be more energy efficient while reducing your monthly energy bill? Belco Energy Efficiency Tips will help you save the environment, save energy, and save money. Did you know that many appliances and electronics have labels that indicate their efficiency and environmental impact? Using tools like energy efficiency labels, standards, and ratings will not only save on energy consumption and costs, but will also help reduce our carbon emissions. For more information on being energy conscious, visit belco.bm or like us on Facebook.
Number one for hip-hop. Number one for R&B.
It's that power, baby.
Power 95, 94.9 Bermuda.
And we're back on Mission to Adjourn. And for those who aren't aware, we are speaking to Shadow of Finance, Douglas Decouto, and Shadow of Home Affairs, Michael Fahy. Shadow, let you continue.
Oh, thank you. I think we were talking about the duty, right, Dwayne?
Yes, correct.
All right, so everyone says, okay, well, why don't you just cut the duty on all the items? I mean, yeah, let's do that. A lot of what you buy, especially like some basic food supplies, either have 0 or really, really low duty rates. Like it could be like 5%. All right, 5%. That is something. But if you're buying an item, let's just call it $10. Its first cost might be, I'm making these up. You run that business, Dwayne. You can sort me out. But for way of example, let's say it was $5 when they imported it. They put 5% on that.
Yep.
Come on, let me do this math online here, man. Let's call it. Is that 25 cents? Yeah, 25 cents.
Yeah,
okay.
dude.
So that's 25 cents. But now they're selling the thing for $10 in the shop. And they had the shipping costs in there. So, trust me, I'm happy to take the 25 cents off it. It's better, but it's not going to move the needle a ton, especially when there's a lot of other costs. So let's say these Trump things go into effect and you can't get those avocados from Mexico to the United States anymore.
Yes.
And what if we can even get those avocados when it's not local avocado season? And some people have a lot of opinions about avocados anyway. That 25 cents, you're not even going to notice that. It's going to be offset by all the other prices. So we would definitely support reducing duty. I just think people have to set their expectations, and no one wants to be the negative Nelly on that. But the reality is the amount that you can cut on some of these basic food items and stuff is not as much as people realize. I know it's something that the Tax Reform Commission's been looking up a lot of, like if the CIT money comes in, how can Bermuda as a whole benefit by reducing certain taxes, and duty is certainly something to be looked at. So.
Excellent.
Yeah, one of the things as well that we need to be very careful of is listening to a lot of the noise, right? And Doug has touched on that. It's well and good for the government to say, yeah, we've cut duty on essential goods, okay? And it's the Apple example, again, just making things as simple as possible. If an apple is $1 in a store, you take 5% off from 0 to 5% to 0. It's so little, it's not going to make a huge difference, but it's welcome all the same. Now, the noise is this. You might recall that what the government's position seems to be is that the duty relief is not being passed on to the consumer, and therefore the answer to that is price controls, therefore the answer to that is going to do audits, therefore the answer to that is set up a co-op supermarket. Let me tell you something about that just does not add up. If the government is going to get engaged in what is already a private enterprise, I cannot for the life of me imagine that they're going to do it any better than what a private enterprise does now. And why is that? Not because I'm not suggesting people that manage it are incompetent, but they're still going to have to buy from the same places that private enterprise is buying from. They're still going to have to set up supply chains. They're still going to have to use the same shipping companies. They're still going to have to deal with the same tariff issues. They're going to be dealing with every single thing that private entities are already dealing with. The other thing that needs to be kept in mind is this, and these are the real things. This is not protecting business. But when you go into, say, a marketplace or a BGA wholesaler, or you go into Butterfield and Vallis, or you go into Arnold's, you go into any of the number of Bermudians that are employed that are driving the delivery trucks, that are acting as the purchasing officers, that are throughout that entire supply chain, that are Bermudians, that are working hard to supply us with the goods and services that we've come to expect. When you bring in a government-subsidized grocery store, because they're going to have to subsidize it because they're not going to be able to otherwise be able to compete properly, they have to put in massive subsidies. That could potentially have a massive knock-on effect to those entities that have been employing Bermudians for decades, right? 50, 60, 70, 80 years, that now we turn around and say, by the way, let's go down to the co-op and maybe you save 3-4%. I don't even see how they can do that. If you look at the biggest grocery store chain now in Bermuda is, I suppose, the Marketplace. You might recall that the OBA, what did we do in like 2014? We negotiated a 10% reduction, okay, with grocery stores for 18 months on all food. Now, people forget that, right? That's what we did. I did it with the Premier at the time. We negotiated that and got the numbers down once a week. So everything from your steak to your kind of soup to your orange, everything was reduced on a Wednesday. It was 10% Wednesdays rather than maybe 5%, okay? Do you know what the PLP said then? And this is why I want everyone to remember about the noise. Take the noise away. They made accusations that, in fact, what was happening is that on Tuesday night, prices were going up in the grocery stores to cover the 10%, and then they'd go rushing around on a Thursday and play with the prices again. Absolutely absurd. Nobody could do that. And the point is, it's just noise to try and make you think that everyone's trying to steal from you, when that's not the case. What we've got to do is be honest about what we can do and what we cannot do. And that's where the issues, in my opinion, lie on these things. It's very easy to throw and cast blame if you don't know the facts.
So, like, let's talk about duty. Here's a thing you could do, right? You could simplify the whole duty thing. Anyone ever look it up? There's a big book. It's hundreds of pages. I don't even know how many items. Many, many thousands. But you could simplify. You could say, we're just going to make a low flat rate or a certain couple of classes. So imagine the paperwork that your importer or your small business has to do when they bring things in and they think about how to price. So you could get rid of that paperwork or simplify it for them a lot. So that's one idea right there.
Yeah, a lot of that. A lot of that is that, as I've said. So if you take DENR, Department of Environment and Natural Resources, and what they have to deal with, the legislation, because we can't blame DENR. They're dealing with a package of legislation that is very, very old. So going along with what Doug is saying, it's time for a comprehensive review about what is actually inhibiting business. And the other things that we do need to talk about, everyone will roll their eyes when I say it, but the other thing that we need to talk about when it comes to cost of living, and the government has been told this now in these meetings, okay, because I've been told by a number of attendees that they're saying to the government, we need more people here to get more goods in, and it lowers the cost. When you bring in more, you can lower costs. That's how it works. It's basic economics. The government doesn't want to hear these things, right? We know we have a population problem. Chamber of Commerce reckon that there's, 55,000 people here? That's down at least 10,000 people. That has a knock-on effect to costs overall. So it's not as simple as price controls. It's not as simple as setting up a co-op. There has to be real work because the system has got serious, deep systemic issues. Most people don't want to do that hard work. It's very easy politically just say, oh, look, I lowered duty on sanitary napkins. I lowered duty on fruit. I did this. That's nice. That's fantastic. But it takes a lot more than that to actually have a real impact on costs. My final point on that, you may recall, since we're on the motion to adjourn show,
Yes, correct.
but in Parliament, you might recall that the Minister, Alexa Lightbourne, gave a statement about cost of living. Okay, and there was a big song and dance about how there's going to be this survey that's been sent out to members of the community to say what are the ideas for lowering costs. And do you remember when we asked the question about when the expectation is of a date of a release of a report? The minister couldn't actually answer the question. She could not give a specific date as to when a report will be released about how to fix the cost of living crisis. Eventually, after pressing from us, she said, towards the end of the year. So we're going to wait 8 months for a report that's going to tell us what we already know. That's then going to take, another 6 months to a year to implement. Meanwhile, we're going to the tills and we're paying too much for everything that we have and everything that we desire. And the government's answer is not acceptable and is not sufficient to make a change on the dial, as Doug has said, using that phrase.
Right. So that leads me to the next question. So your statement mentioned collaboration.
Big word.
Yeah, it is a big word. And I know it's a fine line for opposition to walk, obviously, because you must hold the government to account, provide solutions. And sometimes if those aren't received or the tone is a certain way, the collaboration can break down. So putting it to you both, how do you believe going forward that you would see collaboration happening between the OBA and PLP opposition and government when it comes to safeguarding Bermudians from this threat that really is something that kind of unites us, something that we're all dealing with?
That's a great question, and Mike used the phrase, you got to ignore the noise. So, if you actually go look at what the OBA says on the record up in the House of Assembly or in our statements, you'll see we have supported a lot of initiatives to help Bermudians out. We have voted with the government on a lot of things. We have publicly stated, and we have stood up and said, this is a good idea.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if you listen to the government press statements, they'll be like, oh, the OBA doesn't like healthcare. It's like, actually, we're on the record saying exactly the opposite. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
First part of collaboration, let's at least be honest about what people are saying. And there are things the government does, and moving on from that point, that we do like, and we take care to say why we like them. We have an approach to how things ought to be done. We like things that are targeted, like we know will be effective and are likely to succeed, and we're always happy to call that out and praise government and support it. You have to listen. That's collaboration, is listening. That's two ways. And so if let's say this press release we put out with this idea, instead of the government responding to the press release and saying, appreciate the intention, that's not a good idea, reason A, reason B, reason C. Hey, fair enough. We can disagree on the ideas. We don't have to slag off the people coming up with the ideas and making accusations about things that have nothing to do with the problem facing Bermudians today on the doorstep as they pay their rent and buy their groceries. But we're open for it. I know myself as a new MP, I'm taking great care to listen carefully, to just be measured in my comments, and to really address the substance of the matter and what I like, say what I like, because A, B, and C, what I don't like, and say, hey, I don't like this, not because I don't like you, or not because I don't like the PLP. It's not about that. I think we could do a little bit better here for the people of Bermuda if we adjusted or changed it. But like I said, it requires people to listen and be receptive.
Great.
And on that point, Doug's absolutely right. But take it a step further. In Parliament, the Minister of the Cabinet Office, you may recall, I was talking about education and made a big song and dance accusing the OBA of not being collaborative enough, not listening. Michael Weeks, the Minister of National Security, has made a big song and dance suggesting that our shadow minister is not being collaborative and is not being helpful. So, in my view, the government is talking out of both sides of their mouth. They want to collaborate when perhaps collaboration isn't going to work because it's too political. And then when good ideas come, they shoot us down and don't collaborate at all, but yet call for collaboration. So I'm not quite sure which one it should be. I do believe that there are issues where collaboration is key, and on this particular issue, it is an absolute and should be the way.
This is a crisis.
Yeah, just because it hasn't necessarily happened in the past, and that was one of the journalists questioned us on this. Is there any precedent for it? Who cares if there's a precedent or not? This is, as Doug has said, a national crisis. Whether we like it or not, we are the official opposition that received a number of votes that demonstrated that people don't want to listen to the Progressive Labour Party. So rather than having us coming on and throwing out ideas, and that the government probably will say no because we've come up with it, wouldn't it be better received at a round table where we sit and we say, we think this can work and have it considered, and come out essentially holding hands and saying, on this particular issue, we think we have a great idea that we can work with, and we will not criticize, we will hold people to account and make it so. It's as simple. To me, it's actually quite a simple thing. Instead, we've released a statement, it's been poo-pooed. Fine, that's what the government's going to do. The problem that I often feel, Doug, and you may feel the same way, Dwayne, as well, is that if the more good ideas we come up with, they're almost going to be shot down because we've come up with them. And the government says, no, we can't have that. Maybe 6 months from now they think people forget and they'll do it, which we saw a lot in the throne speech, right? But, that's getting into the weeds. We've come up with a great idea. We think it should be listened to, and I hope that it actually never has to be used, because that would mean the tariffs didn't come into effect.
That would be great. Right? It's like a fire extinguisher, man. It's not like if you buy a fire extinguisher, what, you think your house is going to burn down? Say, no, man.
Well, with that, we'll take one more break, and then we'll come back. Thank you so much.
Are you looking for the perfect dress or suit? Ozone Boutique has you covered. From stunning prom dresses, bridal and elegant formal gowns, to adorable children's clothing, communion dresses, boys' suits, and men's formal wear. They have it all, including plus sizes. Shop local and save with U.S. retail prices. Appointments are filling fast, so call 535-0154 to book yours today. The Ozone Boutique, where every occasion begins in style. Located Old Saddle Lane, 47 Front Street in Hamilton.
Your station always blazing 24/7. Burmese Rio #1 for hip-hop, R&B, old school, and reggae. 94.9 FM, Power 95.
And welcome back. We are with Shadow Minister of Finance, Dr. Decouto, and Shadow of Home Affairs, Michael Fahy. And Doug, you got a big day coming up. It will be your first reply to a budget as Shadow Minister. So congratulations on your election. How are you feeling about that, and what are some of the things you're looking for in this upcoming budget?
How am I feeling? That's a big question. It's been a long week, man. You know, this is not a normal year. You know, you could imagine a normal year, we will kind of roll over how we think about it, analyze the economy, talk about the government spending. This year is very different, and there's a lot of unknowns. Obviously, the corporate income tax, we're kind of still waiting for some more information on what the government's thinking about that. They did provide an idea of that in what's called the pre-budget report, where they provide a very high-level sketch, you might say, like in November, I think it was. But, you know, time has moved on in the world of the CIT and the OECD, so there's that variable. Obviously, we're talking about the cost of living, what we feel is a crisis right now. And I think, you know, that changes how we might think about stuff. So, you know, the OBA was like, over a year ago, said, look, with the CIT, the corporate income tax money, we're very concerned about how the debt has got the country's finances backed into a corner. And so we would wall off or ring fence a chunk of that money to get that debt paid down quickly, because that would give the country more financial flexibility to respond to issues, plus the interest money we spend on the debt. You know, also, I mean, that's $130 million a year. You know, if we get the debt down, we get that number down, and that's more money the government can spend on helping people. Okay, the other key thing we said we would use the CIT on would be infrastructure, right? Because, I mean, I drove up here. I don't think I need to explain that to people. If you go to the airport and you go over the bridges, and everyone's got their story. So we know what that means. Those are like critical national priorities that we've been really jammed up on. And so, you know, the government was like, oh, well, how come you want to create this supply chain contingency fund? I thought you would keep it for these things. I said, well, because it's a critical national priority this year. All right, so that's two things. You know, what's going on with the CIT? What's going on with this cost of living stuff? What is going on with the Trump administration? Well, nobody knows, because people say, what do you think? I say, I got the same social media you have, man, because that's how the information gets out. So those two or three things have me a little. We'll see. We're going to see what the premier comes up with. He's given himself a lot of extra time. I mentioned since our modern political system started in like 68, 69, depending how you're counting, the budget has never been delayed. Now, does that mean you can't do it? No. I mean, there's kind of allowances made for that. But it's not the first time there's been an election near budget time. In fact, I think the OBA actually came into power very close to a budget time, and they just rolled over the budget that was prepared on time, on schedule, because the budget they start that preparation late, 4 or 5 months ahead of time. So by the time the premier called the election, the budget would have essentially been in the bag, short of, some minor tweaks. So I'm a little unsure. I have some theories, which probably, aren't worth too much money, but I have some theories of why he might have delayed that, and like I mentioned, the CIT changes and stuff. So we'll see what happens. We'll be closely watching to see how serious the government is about paying down the debt. We'll be closely watching. The premier had made a lot of promises to a lot of people about what CIT money will be used for, and if you add them all up, it might come up to a lot more than 100%. So we'll be seeing where the government chooses to put its money. Here's one for you. I know you're one of our younger MPs, Dwayne Robinson. Absentee voting. Now,
yes,
the way you decide what is a government serious about is what it puts money next to. Now, the OBA. Now, it's true the OBA didn't quite get that over the line, but you know what? For multiple years, they had a budget item for it and draft legislation, and the Progressive Labor Party took that money out of the budget. So what I will be looking for, that's one thing I'll be looking for. Are they going to put money for absentee voting? So that's the kind of thought process. That's pretty high level. I don't know if that was helpful, but
yeah, I think so. I think it was helpful.
Yeah, it's one of the things I think that the public often doesn't realize is the tediousness of the budget process. And I'm going to put the shadow minister of finance on the spot, because I think it's important that the community is aware of some of the proposals that we have made in terms of how to reform the budget process. The long and short of it is, at the moment, I think we get 56 hours of debate that the opposition sets which areas of the budget we wish to debate. And it's almost gamesmanship by the parties in power to, if you don't want something overly scrutinized, the minister of the day will literally use up all the hours in debate with a long speech, and the opposition doesn't get to scrutinize. That, frankly, is a waste of time for the public. It's a waste of time for the listening public, and it's a waste of time for the opposition, frankly, to sit and listen to, I'll use the word propaganda, because it essentially is a selling point for a government department. Now, with that said, it is inefficient, and it makes very little sense. And I say that as when I was minister, it was inefficient. It didn't make a lot of sense to me. But with that said, I'll just quickly hand it over to Doug, because I think it's important that he can add some flavor to what the proposals are.
Put me on the spot.
I did.
We have made some proposals several weeks ago in writing to the Premier in his capacity as finance minister. I hand-delivered him a letter, and we laid out ideas, a starting point for what I would term a negotiation or discussion with the government about what are some ways we can make the budget debate better for everybody. What are ways we could make it more efficient? What are ways we could, not just for the MPs, but also for the public servants, the public officers who have to come up there and assist the ministers with questions? How can we get more information out to the public by, like, for example, making the ministerial briefs publicly available, online or whatever? Because I know that kind of thing was put out, that spirit of thinking was put out in the throne speech, and we certainly support and really advocate for that. Perhaps we could submit questions ahead of time and exchange some questions in writing, and then those could be put into the record. That would give the ministers more time to confer with their technical officers to make sure the questions were properly answered. And the reality is a good minister would relish the opportunity to really give a careful, thoughtful answer that would demonstrate their prowess in their ministry, their subject matter expertise. So going back to the spirit of collaboration, we did submit this letter in goodwill. Now, obviously, there's parliamentary procedure and so forth, but what we do know is if the government has a mind to do something, and if the opposition is willing, those, I don't want to say details, but those procedural items can be worked out. I can only tell you this. Like I said, I put the letter in the Premier's hand in writing, and I talked to him in person a couple times, and I am waiting to hear a response.
Okay.
So we have said we will create the opportunities for collaboration, and I would say that's an opportunity that we have created and are hoping to see advance.
Well, I'm sure that many will be happy to hear about a proactive, opposition when it comes to these certain things. And for the listening audience, we will have representatives from the Progressive Labour Party on at a later date to give their insight and their perspective on these particular topics, as we are a non-partisan show that we both represent the large main parties. We try to make sure that the listening audience gets both sides and both bites of the cherry, right? So I want to, first of all, thank you both for coming on to the show and giving us some of your time. And I just want to hand it over to any final message you'd like to give to the listening public before we wrap up. Both of you?
Thanks, Dwayne. I think you've heard us say that there are workable solutions for cost of living. These are not the only ones. There are a lot others out there, but we are not supportive of certain proposals the government has said, and we've explained why on this show. There are a number of other pieces to this, and I'm sure I can now put Dwayne on the spot and say I'd like to come back with the minister or the shadow minister to talk about housing, to talk about energy costs, all of which relate to the cost of living and what is affecting every Bermudian and how it is affecting our pocketbooks. What is it that we can do? And listen to our proposals. Thank you, Dwayne.
Like Michael said, we spent a lot of time thinking about, caring about, and discussing how do we help the man on the street. We really are focused on that. And if you want to know what the One Bermuda Alliance thinks and feels about that, you should hear what we actually say and not get a third hand filtered through somebody else. it's a major issue facing Bermuda, and I can tell you I spend a lot of my time worrying about it and talking to constituents about it, and we're working on it for Bermuda, and we look forward to working on it with the government.
Well, thank you for that, and I appreciate it. And we probably will have a follow-up probably after the budget or a little further down. DJ LA, you survived your first show. Welcome.
Yes.
Yes, more to come. And in that regard, we will wish you all a happy Easter, happy Good Friday holiday. We'll probably be back the next Thursday with hopefully reps from the Progressive Labour Party or an independent person to speak on this topic. But if not, we will, carry on. And I won't say see, because I keep getting in trouble with my co-host when they say see you and it's only radio. So we will be back next Thursday. Thank you so much.
You're locked to Power 95, Bermuda's big station at 94.9 FM, a Bermuda Broadcasting Company station.